Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Mike Whitmer. I'm Vice President of NCMIC's Chiropractic Insurance Programs, and welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I have a few notes I'd like to share with you. We're using the webinars to explore a variety of topics affecting how you practice. If you have ideas you would like to address, please enter them in the questions chat feature on your GoToWebinar menu. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you would like to ask our guest a question, you can enter that in the questions feature on your GoToWebinar menu. Our monthly webinars are broadcast live, but the recordings will be available in the resources section of ncmic.com. All registered attendees will receive an email later today with access to the recorded webinar. Our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, March 18th at 2 p.m. Central Time. We're going to be talking with Dr. Stephen Gould, who will be discussing surprises in chiropractic imaging. I hope you'll be able to join us for that. Today's webinar is about business insurance for the chiropractic practice. Before I introduce today's guest, I have a quick disclaimer to keep our compliance folks happy. NCMIC is presenting this webinar for informative and educational purposes. The examples and explanations you're about to hear are not all-encompassing of the risks associated with a chiropractic practice, and we highly recommend that you talk with a licensed insurance professional who can assist you in assessing all of your risks your practice may encounter and customizing policies to meet your unique needs. So with that, I'm happy to have with us today Abigail Im. Abigail is an agent with NCMIC Insurance Services, our full service insurance agency, and she's going to help us understand the coverages you need for your practice. Abigail has been in the insurance business for 15 years and worked at a Fortune 100 company prior to joining NCMIC. She specializes in the sale of business insurance for chiropractic and naturopathic offices. Abigail is licensed in personal and commercial lines as well as life insurance. So Abigail, welcome to our webinar and thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's go ahead and dig in. Business insurance is important for chiropractors. Why is it important?
Well, I'm glad that you asked. There are a number of reasons that business insurance is important, but some of the top reasons that I feel business insurance is important for our doctors is your business is your biggest asset. It is something that you have worked very hard to build. You went to college for this. This is what you specialize in. This is your career. And to know that one claim would be enough to, bankrupt you or to hurt your business is just, almost too much to fathom. So it's very important to protect your biggest asset. It provides that legal defense of protecting your reputation. Even if a claim is frivolous and there's no merit to it, anyone can bring a claim up at any time, and just defending that and trying to protect your reputation is a big cost associated with it. And I know with business insurance, a lot of people think it's expensive, and honestly, it's not. It's very inexpensive, especially for our small business owners, to make it affordable to protect your practice, and it's something that you can't afford not to have. So I did want to share just an example of when a small task, albeit not a fun one, but something that does happen in everyday office, can create just a large issue for our doctors. So we had an employee at one of our doctor's offices that was let go. On their way out, they decided to steal a laptop that contained the medical records of 500 patients. The employee brought a wrongful termination suit against the doctor and posted sensitive information on their social media about the patients that they didn't like. Our doctor filed a police report and found out that the employee had a criminal history for multiple thefts. They were fined $100,000 for not being HIPAA compliant, for failing to conduct background checks on their employees. They were sued for $1.5 million by a patient whose medical records was one of the ones that was released online. And then the doctor was able to recover the laptop, but then had to pay $75,000 to a firm to conduct forensics in order to determine whose patients were affected by the breach. Lawyers estimated between $25,000 to $50,000 just to send out notification letters and provide credit monitoring, and another $75,000 to manage the public relations behind just that sensitive information getting out. In addition to that, that wrongful termination case that went all the way to court and cost another $75,000. So just an example of something that should be a task within your office. When it goes wrong, it can cost over $2 million in damages, fines, penalties, fees, etc.
Wow. Not many practices can take that kind of hit and keep going without the proper insurance in place. So as we start talking about business insurance for DCs, let's start by discussing the different types of business structures chiropractors typically utilize and how that impacts their business insurance decisions.
Right, I appreciate you bringing that up. I see in my field all different types of businesses. I see independent contractors or 1099s that are just with maybe a large practice and contracted out for their work. I see sole proprietors, corporations, LLCs. You can have a doctor subleasing from another doctor. You can have doctors who are starting a small practice or purchasing an existing practice, or you can also have a large practice that has several different locations. So no matter what type of business you have, we can absolutely protect that and make sure you have the right coverage.
Okay. So if a chiropractor is an independent contractor, what type of business insurance policy typically will meet their needs?
That is something that we see a lot of. So if you have a doctor who's an independent contractor, they don't have any equipment, they're in a large office, their risks are going to be pretty limited. And so usually a general liability policy will be enough for protecting their business. So a general liability policy can help to cover bodily injuries and property damage that a business may have caused. That can include a customer slip and fall or employee accidents. It can cover advertising injury that your business causes by maybe defaming somebody else or another company, copyright infringement from using somebody else's work in your business ads without their permission. And you may not realize that that's copyright infringement, but that's something that they can, send a cease and desist on. Reputational harm, if you said something in an interview about another business owner that maybe negatively impacted their business or their company. And I will say liability claims are very common. They can come up during normal business operations. They can get very expensive for small businesses, and many don't have the resources to cover a liability claim like you mentioned before. An average cost of a slip and fall is $20,000, and if you're faced with reputational harm lawsuit, then you're more than likely going to be around $50,000. So without liability coverage, your business would be out of pocket for those costs. And again, this is just a small independent contractor who doesn't have any equipment.
Right.
Some of the aspects of that general liability policy is it also has medical expense coverage, which is a goodwill coverage to help pay for medical regardless of who's at fault. So a couple of examples of when you would see this liability kick in or how it can protect you. We had a doctor that had an older client who slipped and fell on ice and broke their hip. And on their way down, their cell phone flew out of their hand and that broke as well. So thankfully, they were with a reputable carrier. It did cause both bodily injury and property damage that was able to be compensated by the carrier, thankfully, because they had that liability. Another example is the damage to the premise that's rented to you. So if you leave a coffee pot on and it catches your building on fire, who's going to be responsible for those damages? Exactly. And so in that instance, it can also catch, the fire next door. We've seen that happen where the building next door real estate office gets damaged, and now you're responsible for that as well. So that's an important component to the liability. Another one that we talked about was that advertising injury. And so we had a doctor who was very invested in growing their business online, as a lot of us are through social media. And they found a review from a client who stated that their office was unprofessional and they didn't want to help with the injury. And the doctor replied to that comment thinking they were doing the right thing by acknowledging that they thought the customer was rude, impatient, and that's impossible to satisfy a crazy client who doesn't follow instructions. But that client turned around and sued the doctor for $500,000 due to liable and intentional infliction of emotional distress. So thankfully that was part of the policy and they were able to utilize their general liability to help with those advertising injuries.
Okay. So as we are talking about general liability, how does that work if a doctor is also recommending and selling nutritional supplements or other types of products?
Yes, I appreciate that, Mike. I'm glad that you brought that up because we see that all the time with our doctors. We have doctors who just have supplements available, name brand supplements available in their practice. And so if a client needs a zinc or a vitamin C, they'll prescribe that right then and there. And so a nice component of that general liability we were talking about before is that it has products completed operations, which is a form of insurance that covers you from customer lawsuits alleging property damage or injury due to your product. So it's very common with medicines or very common with supplements that they have that completed operations. But one important thing I do want to point out is if any doctors are putting their own label, manufacturing their own products, we have a lot of doctors that do, diet and nutrition or have their own line of supplements or have a foam roller they created, that they get what's called product liability insurance, which is separate, but it's specific to protect those products that they're creating and putting their name on and putting their name behind.
Okay. So let's say a doctor owns their own equipment and leases their office. Are their needs any different?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that this is probably much more common than just a doctor who is subleasing and doesn't have any equipment. A lot of the doctors that we have a full service practice. So they have their own equipment, they have their own assets. They've built their practice, like I said, from the ground up. And so what we're doing with this is we're taking everything we just talked about in that general liability, that all-encompassing policy, and now we're adding to it what's called commercial property insurance. And so commercial property insurance is covering the physical assets. So let's say that you take the roof off of your building, turn it upside down and shake it. Everything that falls out, that's all your physical assets, your computers, your furniture, your tables, your x-ray machines. And so having commercial property insurance can help to pay for repair replacement costs if your business gets damaged by a fire, an explosion, burst pipes, storm, theft, vandalism, some other covered loss.
Okay. So what about if the doctor owns their own building?
Right. So their needs are going to be very different because now we're talking about a whole structure that doctor is going to be caring for. And there are different types of owning a building. That doctor could plan to occupy the full space. That doctor could be renting out some of the space to other tenants. But now they're responsible for the physical building and structure, any completed additions, all of the permanent fixtures. And so we would extend coverage to the building itself in the event that there was, again, some type of fire or explosion or another covered loss.
Okay. So what about when a doctor has financed their building and maybe some of their equipment? Is there anything that they need to do with their lenders?
There certainly is. So one common request that we get, and we see this all the time, is if you're financing a piece of equipment or you're financing your building, usually that company will want to be listed as what's called a loss payee on your policy. And this is not uncommon by any means. I know it sounds scary, but all it means is that if that equipment is damaged, the company wants to make sure that they're still going to get paid back for the loan that they gave. And so it's really easy to add that onto a policy. And then another thing that we see a lot, which is very common, is if you're renting space, your landlord may want to be added as an additional insured. Again, it sounds scary, but it is very common. And it's just making sure that you're maintaining the liability as per your contract with them.
Okay. All right. So let's say a chiropractor's office is damaged in a fire and they're unable to practice due to the damage. Is there any protection for the income that they're going to lose due to having their office closed because of that fire?
I'm so glad you asked this, Mike. So the answer is yes. This one is very simply just called business income coverage. And so what this is doing is it's providing some additional coverage when your business shuts down temporarily due to a fire or some other covered loss. It helps to replace your income, your covered expenses like rent, payroll, other financial responsibilities while your property is being repaired or replaced. It isn't something that's going to be covered under your professional or that general liability that we were talking about before. So having a full business insurance policy is really one of the only ways to get this type of coverage to cover that lost income. And some other benefits to it is it can also help to pay for an additional space if you have to rent out a temporary location while your building is being repaired, or advertising if you have to get a new location altogether because for whatever reason they're unable to repair or replace that building. So again, this is one of the only ways to get that coverage, and it's important to have that full business owner's policy to have that loss of income.
Okay. So are there any other coverages associated with the business owner's policy that our listeners need to be aware of?
Ooh, really good question. There are a couple that I would love to just bring up. You know, with these are optional coverages, and so we are familiar with the chiropractic business, and it's something that we typically include, but they're optional. So if anyone's interested, that's something they just want to make sure that they either have or don't have based on what their business needs are. But one of those is the hired and non-owned auto. And what that does is it covers the commercial liability expenses triggered by accidents involving hired or such as rental cars or borrowed vehicles like employee-owned vehicles. So say that you have an employee that runs a check to the bank or you're renting a vehicle in your business name. You may not realize that that would be a coverage that could be added to your business insurance, but more than likely a personal policy is not going to cover any business errands. So this is a coverage that would help to kick in and take care of that.
Okay.
And then another one that I wanted to bring up, and this one is vital for, at least for what we see chiropractic offices, is cyber liability. And so when we were talking about before that employee that stole that laptop and posted sensitive information online, that would be some type of data breach or cyber event. So the cyber liability helps to cover the financial losses as a result from a data breach or cyber event. It can also help to cover the credit monitoring and the PR firms and other expenses as part of the data breach, but most policies only cover the fines and defense. So it is important that you know what type of cyber coverage you have, and that is an all-encompassing policy to help protect your business.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, let's take a moment here and give your voice a rest for just a moment. We're going to do a quick poll question, a pop quiz, if you will. We're going to put a question up on your screen. Please respond, and we're going to share the responses. So the poll is open now. We're at 13% voted. Almost there. Going to keep it open for 1 minute, and we'll close it down. So, and we're at about 73% voted. So thank you. And we're at 80%. I think I'm going to go ahead and call it. This one, you all know your commercial insurance, 100% said property portion. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Abigail says that's correct. All right. Thank you for participating, everyone. All right. Let's move on, Abigail.
Okay.
All right. So what if a doctor has employees in their clinic? What additional insurance coverages do they need to take into consideration?
Yes, a lot of our doctors do have employees, and as your business grows, this almost becomes a necessity to your business. So a couple of things. One would be workers' compensation, and I know it's required by most states, so you probably are aware of it or you've heard of it. But more than it just being a required coverage, it's peace of mind knowing that you are protected from an employee getting injured at work. We had a doctor who had an office staff that was just moving a file cabinet around and ended up cutting their hand open on the file cabinet. And they had to get stitches. They were unable to function fully. When you're an office staff, you're doing things like typing on the computer. You're doing a lot of work with your hands. And so having to have stitches and having to let that rest really slowed down their productivity and what they were able to do. But they were very blessed that, the doctor had the workers' compensation in order to help cover that. And it wasn't an out-of-pocket expense. That the office staff was able to easily go through that policy and file a claim and get the coverage that they needed without any issues. And so that's part of the reason why that workers' compensation is required is it's that peace of mind of knowing that if somebody gets injured or has a work-related illness, that they're able to have that coverage that they need. Another one that we get a lot of, and this one is almost equally, if not more important, is the employment practices liability. And so this may be something that you're aware of, or it may be something that you're not aware of, but this is a coverage that's very wide range in what it's looking at. It's looking at defense costs for damages related to various employment related type claims, including allegations of wrongful termination, discrimination, workplace harassment, retaliation. That disgruntled employee that we talked about earlier who found out, you know, that they were being let go, they went and they took that to another level, you know, and they can bring that case at any time, regardless of, again, if there's any merit to it. If you have a disgruntled employee who found out an associate of theirs is making more than they do, or feel they were being treated unfairly at work, or maybe they just took something you said in the wrong manner. Any of these things can happen, and so making sure that you are protected against these type of allegations and claims can really help steer you in the right direction and give you that peace of mind, knowing that you can hire employees without worrying about some type of allegation.
Sure. Okay. All right. Time for another poll question. So we're going to put this up on the screen, same as the last one. Poll's open. We'll keep it open for about a minute. Okay, we're at about 13% voted.
Come on, guys, this one's easy.
Yeah. Okay, we've got more coming in. We'll keep it open for about 20 seconds more.
Okay. I want the names of everyone who gets this wrong, Mike.
So far, everyone's gotten it right, so we're
Okay,
good.
Good. A lot of smart people in this class. I like it.
Yeah, and as soon as we close this down, we've got a few questions that have come in that we'll address.
Okay, excellent. I love questions.
All right, we're at 1 minute, so let's go ahead and close down the poll. And we've got 92% said workers' compensation and 8% said general liability.
Okay, well, the correct answer to that one is workers' compensation. So again, if you have an employee that is injured at work, the workers' compensation is going to help to cover that. Unfortunately, the general liability isn't for employees, but you would have to be legally held liable for the injuries or the property damage.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go to a few questions that we've had come in. First one, great question. One that I often think about, living in the Midwest where we flood rather frequently. What if my office floods?
That is a fantastic question. I will say that flooding is very rarely ever included on any property policy that you have, whether that be your homeowner's policy, whether that be your business insurance policy that we're talking about here today. Flood insurance is typically a separate policy that's governed through FEMA, and it's going to be the same rate no matter who you go with. So if that is something that you're looking to have, you'll want to make sure that you're asking your agent about flood insurance specifically, because it's like I said, rarely ever would it be covered under one of your property policies.
Okay, thank you. All right. I've seen some malpractice policies that include some of these coverages that we've talked about. If I have that, I should be good, right?
I should be good, right? Not necessarily. So
Okay.
what we've seen with a lot of these included coverages is that it's very minimal coverage and it's not sufficient to meet the needs of your practice, where a business owner's policy or even just a general liability policy that we were talking about before is usually a much better fit, because it's so much more comprehensive than, hey, I just included this free coverage for you.
Sure.
A free coverage sometimes is just what it sounds like. You're getting something that's free, or maybe you're being overcharged enough in the first place that they can include those free coverages. But you'll want to just know what's included with that and making sure that's not minimal coverage. We talked about before the cyber liability, usually just covering fines and penalties and not covering any of that response, that credit monitoring, the forensics to help determine who all was impacted by that. So it's usually not sufficient enough to meet the needs of a business, and a business owner policy is much better for those reasons.
Sure. And you know, the business owner's policy, I think that you have the opportunity to really sit down with somebody and go through your practice, identify the risks, and those policies are customizable. Am I correct?
They're absolutely customizable. We, at least for what we do, is, or any agent should be walking through and asking you questions about your business, trying to identify how your business runs, how it operates, which of these coverages are going to be applicable to you and your business. Do you label your own products? Do you have employees? And they're really going to try to tailor that policy to meet the needs of your specific business. And again, it may sound like this is expensive because how many coverages do we just go over? But you'll come to find that it's really very inexpensive, and it provides you with all of that protection and all of that benefit to your business.
Okay, great. We do have one more question that's come in, and it says, why doesn't business interruption insurance cover offices that need to close temporarily?
So business interruption insurance does cover offices that need to close temporarily in the event of a direct physical loss. So if there is direct physical damage to the property, then you would have business income kick in the event that you are unable to work due to that covered loss. What we are seeing right now, and especially the world that we're in, is we're in a pandemic, and we have a lot of businesses that were unfortunately closed due to COVID. Sure. And since COVID isn't doing any physical damage to the premise, unfortunately, there isn't any coverage on the policy for that. But again, if there was to be some type of direct physical loss to the property, this is a great benefit and something to kick in. COVID is just so new, and it's something we've never seen before, and unfortunately, it just doesn't meet the criteria for that.
Yeah, I expect we'll be seeing more on that and adaptive products in the future as well. So stay tuned, right?
Right. Okay. After 9/11, we had terrorism included in a lot of policies. So it's not to say that it wouldn't come at a later time. I think this just kind of hit everyone out of nowhere, and it was a big surprise and definitely a big change.
Yep. Good point. Thank you. Thank you, Abigail. I really appreciate it. Thanks for helping us through this topic. In closing, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We hope that the information presented has been helpful to your daily practice. Before we go, I have a couple reminders. Just a reminder that, again, to keep our compliance folks happy, this webinar has been presented by NCMIC for informative and educational purposes. The examples and explanations that we discussed are not all encompassing of the risks a chiropractic practice may face, and we highly recommend you talk with a licensed insurance professional who can assist you in assessing all of the risks your practice may encounter and customizing policies to meet your unique needs. Okay. I'd also like to remind you of the resources section on ncmic.com. We're continually adding to our content with information to help you navigate daily practice and deal with challenges that you're facing. We have information out there on a wide variety of topics, including COVID issues and risk management, so please check that out. This webinar will be posted to our webinar resource page, where you can also access recordings of our past webinars. You can also keep up to date on new resources from NCMIC by following us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. One final note, please mark your calendars for March 18th at 2 p.m. Central Time for our next webinar. We're going to be talking with Dr. Stephen Gould, who's going to be discussing radiology issues with us. So with that, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Abigail Im, for joining us, and I hope you can make it for our next webinar. Have a good afternoon.